about going forward in terms of policy, but also in terms of practice, because there are multiple issues that have been mentioned so far. Teaching, mobility, and intercultural communication. Is there anything that you feel at this point that may be important to consider to enhance the global visibility of the African higher education context and the integration and the competitiveness globally? Any thoughts on that?
I think Dr. Isaac has raised a hand.
Yeah. Anyone? Felix? Ruth? No thoughts? I guess, I mean, we have discussed a few of these issues already, in terms of, what could be done. I think it's clear that there are new trends, there are new challenges in terms of mobility issues. I mentioned before restrictions on recruitment, for example. Sorry, Felix, were you going to say something?
Yeah, sure,
yes,
absolutely. I've got a number of things that I would like to say, which could constitute priorities for us on the African continent for internationalization. I think that we need to create funding for Arua. If it is there, then perhaps we need to double it or even treble it, because I think internationalization is probably one of the most important features for the development of any university. And so pumping money into Arua for it to be able to monitor the development of internationalization on the continent would be a very important, aspect. Perhaps the second thing is through Arua as well, perhaps it might be very useful to try and bring in different strategies on the African continent and develop an Africa-wide kind of strategy for internationalization. This would not be kind of a prescriptive framework, but probably something that suggests what seems to be important, for the African continent. I guess you see the point I'm trying to make here is I think Africa now needs an African momentum towards some of these developments, rather than a country-based momentum. Country-based momentums are very important in the fact that I think they are more highly contextualized and contextual-based, which is very important. But I think in this particular case, an African momentum is likely to bring more visible structures that you are talking about in your question. It is likely to bring more impactful structures and systems on the continent. But I think that this kind of funding for Arua would also be used to fund more research chairs across the continent on themes and sub-themes of internationalization. I think funding of chairs on internationalization, research chairs on internationalization on the continent is one of the things that we do not actually have on the continent. And yet I think that this is an area which needs investing in. And I think that if we were to be working through the auspices of Arua, probably we could also strengthen the kinds of links that we would engage in with other continents in the sub-regions, in the South American region, I think would be a very, very useful part of our internationalization strategy. But also, strengthening our linkages with Europe itself, with China, and with the United States of America as well. Perhaps you can see that I'm not selective in who we engage with. Rather, I am very mindful about the good work that is happening in different parts of the world. And I think it is more about the good work that is happening in different parts of the world that we should seek to engage with, rather than being selective for this and that other reason. I think that the African continent would do well if it speeded up doctoral training. Doctoral training is a driver for a lot of things that happen in higher education, and without it, internationalization is also likely to fall behind. If I were to be asked for one of my greatest passions in terms of what needs to be developed on the continent, I think it will be a center for the study of indigenous and world philosophies. I think that our indigenous philosophies have not had sufficient, attention on the continent, but also in terms of knowing and understanding the world, we seem to have been biased towards the understanding of the Western world rather than understanding of the wider world. And I think that such a center would be very, very useful. And finally, one of the things that I think could be very useful in terms of establishing a presence on the very strong publishing footprint on the continent, in the key regional areas of Africa, for example. But all this comes if we have an Africa-wide momentum rather than a country-driven momentum. A country-driven momentum, rich, yes, but I think for greater visibility, greater coming together, and greater value for the African continent, we need that kind of an arrangement. Thank you very much. I'll stop there, Joanna.
Thank you very much, Felix. That's great. Thank you. Ruth or Krishna, I think we might have lost Fauziat for some reason, but Ruth and Krishna, would you like to add anything to this point?
Yes, we talk a lot of things, and that these are very, very important one from all perspectives. Thank you. I would more go with, as my colleague said, leveraging our strategic partner, particularly, how African University can engage in both Western and Eastern institutions while maintaining the autonomy. We already talked about intellectual property and ownership, those kind of things. And also focusing on the capitalizing the regional integration that includes includes probably the African continental free trade area that can promote the inter-Africa, student and faculty mobility. I can see the way that China and US and other countries, the way look into the African resources. It should be the same way Africa also targeting these Western or Asian institutions and economic market. And now we live in digital era, so building digital and research infrastructure could be helpful. That includes collaborating with the global tech leaders, who can enhance AI and STEM education for our student and faculty members. And as a faculty, I am particularly interested in engaging in the South-South collaboration, cooperation that strengthen our ties with Latin America or Asian university that can reduce the dependency on the Western models. For me, I believe again the rich African history, legacy, and it has tremendous resources. We already talk about knowledge construction, deconstruction. We have the power in Africa. So that's all I stop here. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Krishna. That's great. Okay, I think like you said, we have covered a huge amount of areas, and we could clearly see that internationalization is a multi-layered phenomenon that we can address in various ways. And I think we can now open the floor for any questions that the audience would like to ask, any comments. So, Dr. Darko, is there anything you would like to say about that for now?
Thank you so much, Dr. Joanna Yusuf. And we see a couple of hands up, that of Dr. Isaac Chunebua-Kodia. Doc, can you please put your microphone on and your video also, we can hear from you. Thank you.
All right. So thank you very much, everyone, for this great opportunity. I think it is one of the sessions that really would go a long way to empower every African university to be able to build our global competitiveness. I have one question. My question is basically, if we look at the internationalization that we are trying to promote now, the public schools, especially, for example, in Ghana, have had the opportunity to be the first ones to be established. And as a result of that, they seem to be getting more advantage over the private universities. So in terms of students enrollment, the public schools are able to attract more international students. In terms of even funding from agencies, the public school even gets much more attraction than the private schools. My question is, based on this discussion we're having now, what can private universities in Africa do to improve their global visibility and, most importantly, their competitiveness, such that they become a go-to school to attract more international students and more of this collaboration that we're actually looking for? Because much that we can have more of the private schools collaborating with international schools, that would improve overall African university perspective as far as our curriculum development and all this are concerned. So how can we have some ideas to be able to do this to improve our competitiveness and then our global visibility? Thank you very much.
So much, I agree. We can have one of the panelists address the issue, or we can have more comments. Doc Yusuf, what do you suggest?
I would leave it to the speaker or anyone to address the question if they wish.
All right.
So perhaps Felix, Ruth, or Krishna, anyone would like?
Anyone can answer.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I start if you may?
Yes, please.
I think the question of public universities receiving the attention in terms of funding by their governments is pretty obvious around the world, and it is also obvious on the African continent. One of the arguments that I have made about this way of looking at the funding of higher education institutions is that I think there is an underlying assumption that private universities are for profit and therefore they don't need to be funded by the government. They are privately owned and therefore cannot be funded by the government. But I think, yes, while these arguments have something in them, there is a sense in which we are also at the same time suggesting that it is only the public universities which educate people for the public services. I think private universities equally educate people for the public services. And so while we should or we cannot advocate for equal or equality in funding between public universities and private universities, I think that their role in contributing to the human capacity development of the nation should be acknowledged, and acknowledged in a way through which perhaps those universities could perhaps receive some kind of a calculated subsidy for them to be able to do their work more effectively. So that's one of the things. But I think amongst themselves, universities, private universities, if they are going to be competing as individual institutions, I think they will be at a double, it will be double jeopardy for them. For me, I think private universities should simply come together as a group and then begin to advertise, begin to market, begin to mobilize, begin to think about ways in which they would like to internationalize together as a unit, and begin to form also policies that relate to private higher education in different parts of Africa, so as to be able to gain some momentum and traction as single institution. I don't think we can come together and do things, together. I want to stop there now, Joanna and Doku.
Thank you very much.
Right. Okay.
All right. Okay. So this is Ruth. I have a problem with my laptop. It is restarting. So I'm using my phone to respond to the question that came with how private can gain more as compared to the public universities, as it may be. So one of the things that I think, you see, for this, I think that what could happen is that private universities can also offer some competitive international programs. So what they can do is they can have this dual degree or training program with international universities, which will gain the attention of the public. So they can improve on their international programs, which could also serve as a means which will interest students to and other foreign agencies to be able to be involved in whatever they are doing. They can also help. I think that institutional branding is also very important. So most times what happens is that when we look at the rankings that come, like the Science Higher Education rankings that come, we end up seeing most of the public universities, but we hardly see the private universities. So I think that private universities can also improve their institutional branding and global visibility, right, by involving themselves in these rankings, the higher example like the Times Higher Education rankings, so that it will market the private universities out there. Another thing I can talk about to the private universities by strengthening their research and innovative capacity. So for you to get investors or international agencies to partner with the university, it will be if they're able to strengthen their research and innovative capacity, which will attract international attention, so that they can also benefit from the internationalization that we are talking about. So basically, I think I'm looking at the research output and then also the visibility and the branding of the institution, that's the private institution, so that they can in a way be able to be at par with the public universities when it comes to internationalization.
Thank you very much, Ruth. That's great. Thank you. Okay, we have any other questions?
Yeah, any further questions? I think we had Professor Suleiman Sadiq, who also had his hand up for a while. He is still not. We've not seen him his hand up. If you can hear us, Prof. Suleiman, let's and then see your hand up. Just a little bit support the comment thus far. I think the question from Dr. Isaac Chunebu-Akodia, as expressed by Professor Felix, that the efforts of individual private universities to expose themselves to such advantages is quite bleak. It is important that they associate, they come together, build strong synergies to have a stronger force, or they affiliate themselves to able institutions who also have got that global leverage. And this initiative is one of them. Signing up to this initiative, being part of this webinar series, exposes you to organizations like the AAU, who is a go-to platform for you to engage and avail yourself to these opportunities to be known globally and also gain more traction on that global phase. So that is also an avenue for you also to learn more, engage further, and build that strength you're looking for as a private university. So this is a comment just to pass through and build that engagement further on. Thank you.
Well, I think the alumni network can also help. They can build a very strong global alumni network, so that the alumni stands or they become like ambassadors for internationalization for their institutions. So I think the alumni network could also help in that aspect.
Sure.
That's great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments at this point?
Let me check the chat section and see if we have any questions there.
So, okay. Yeah, okay.
Okay, I guess, while we're waiting for questions, if I may just say something at this point. We have identified a few very, very important areas for further research, for collaborations. Using the AU as a platform to bring institutions across Africa together, and that's an incredible opportunity. Okay, there is hand up. Please go ahead.
Professor Suleiman Sadiku, so let's hear from you. Hello, Prof. Suleimana. Please go ahead. We'll hear from you. I don't know if Prof can hear us.
Looks like the audio is not working there.
Yeah, Prof. Sadiku, can you hear me? Okay, I think he has an issue with his sound. Prof, I'm afraid your sound is not audible. Can you maybe rejoin and let's see if it could be worked out?
Or you can type your questions in the chat box.
Yeah, or you can type the question in the chat box and we can read it out loud for you. If you would want to go for the option of typing your question in the chat box and we would read it out for you. All right, I think we've got some new questions in the chat box. I will want to read them out so we can hear them and provide you answers. I think this one is from Les Asim. She says, it is troubling to hear about academic xenophobia. So what hope do we have for local internationalization? It is open to any of the speakers to provide some answers to it. Final comment from Pick Stacy is private universities can afford to be more innovative from my experience. So I think that internationalization nation aspect can only fuel that creativity. This takes form of various organizational actors who can get involved in innovating teaching. Thanks for this wonderful seminar. So much. Patrick. This from Semukeleso Gono from the Southern Africa Regional Office of the AAU says, why is it easier for the institutions from the global north to establish international campuses in the global south than institutions from the global south entering the global north? This is even observed in collaborative researches where at most principal investigators will be from the global north, yet investigations will be in the south. This is then to translate equitable collaborations. This is from Gono, who's from the Southern Africa Regional Office, the AAU. So these are some comments and questions that came from our participants, and I would want to share it with our speakers. Krishna, Ruth, if you want to just share some thoughts on it.
Sure, I can answer the questions on why is it easier for the institution from the global north to establish and why not the other way around. That's a good question, yes. But this imbalance in internationalization and research collaboration is rooted in historical, economic, and structural inequalities between institutions in the global north and global south. The factors could be, again, going back to the institutional power disparity, the economic thing as well. Institutions in the global north have a greater financial resources. It's more historical. They have bigger endowment and the government funding that allowed them to establish those international campuses and fund research abroad. And global south institutions often operate with limited budgets, infrastructure challenge, and dependency on external funding that makes expansion into global north difficult, very difficult. The one thing, the way we have seen in Africa or some countries in Asia, is the instability of the politics. Politics is so unstable, and that is one of the barriers. And many countries in maybe global north, particularly the case of Asia, the government institutions are governed by the political parties, or government has a direct interfere of these institutions, by appointing by chancellor directly from the political appointee for next 3 to 4 years, or for a longer time. And that set of ruling, give a strict, very strict restrictions for the mobility. So the other thing, many countries in the global north have a strict accreditation and regulatory framework, making it difficult for global south institutions to establish campuses or partnership. That includes the types of course they teach, the professors, the students, and there are so many little things involved to make sure that these courses offered there carry the same weight. And a little bit is about the government, again, in those countries that are more welcoming to foreign institutions as a part of these strategies for investment or improve educational access, or even to boost the international ranking. That's why you have seen, NYU, New York University, going in Abu Dhabi or Singapore or, China. There are certain collaborations and their institutions are very powerful. If you look at the university ranking and those things, those kind of things are also playing a key role. And earlier you have heard from our colleagues that the standard is important, maintaining about the academic gatekeeping or knowledge hegemony, those things. And now in a global south, you have a bigger pressure of publishing top tier journals, Scopus, all kind of crazy things happening in the global south, asking, the faculty members to demonstrate, higher standard of academic. All right, my colleague want to say something. Okay, I want to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Krishna. I'm not sure exactly what's happening there for the votes. I think, Krishna, you can continue if there's...
Well, I was simply talking about the ranking and internationalization. That's also one of the projects I was working with several, universities, including University of Oxford, Yale University, and colleagues from Stanford and some of the public universities. That's the one way taking us to look into why those parameters and imbalances is occurring. But pretty much I have said in those things why, that sort of traffic from global north to global south is not happening regarding to one of the questions. So I stop here and let my colleagues chime in.
Thank you very much, Krishna. Okay.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Good afternoon, Prof. Sadiku. Go ahead, sir. We're glad we can hear you.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. I want to commend all our presenters on this wonderful topic on internationalization of African higher education. I want to say that it has a historical background. Since 2013, when we had the AAU conference at Victoria Falls, that was the theme of the conference on how we internationalize African universities. And those of us who are privileged to be there felt the high time to do it. Then when we came to our, that's West African equivalent, that's Association of West African University, which was in Ghana, Cape Coast, in 2015. The issue came up on, well, for us to achieve internationalization, we must harmonize our curricula so that we can discuss on the common front. However, I want to depart a bit from this north-south divide issue. I have a comment on the chat box that we need to build a very strong foundation as African universities. And when we have a very strong foundation through our local content that is nationalized and globally and nationally competitive in our respective countries, then we begin to partner amongst ourselves. Internationalization is about relationship between countries. It does not have to be between Africa and Europe or Africa and America. It can be between two African countries, maybe Nigeria and South Africa, can be doing something great, and that is internationalization. As I'm talking to you now, I'm speaking from our African Center of Excellence in an aspect of research, which we call mycotoxin and food safety. It's in Federal Technology, Nigeria. And this is a good example of internationalization by way of research. We have students from all over Africa in my university. I'm talking from that center right now. So what I believe that otherwise this talk on North-South, global, non-global South has been there. And as long as there are comparative advantage over the rest in terms of economy, in terms of technology, that advantage remains there. But we can build our local capacity and we can begin to internationalize amongst African universities through research, through staff exchange, training, and through community engagement services. We have regional center of expertise in Mina town, and in my university is a chapter. So through this, we internalize and build a very strong foundation for ourselves as Africans, and by that, we will now discuss with the rest of the world from a very strong position. If we want to just internalize without putting our house in order, make our home strong, then we are going nowhere. That's one. Two, historically, we had internationalization when we had colonial government in place. Most universities in Africa in the 70s and the 80s were internationalized. They had European faculties, students, lecturers alike. But today, visit them because Post-independence, when Africans were left to fend for themselves because of economic downturn, we were left behind. Our economy is still down, but as we peak,
I think we've lost the line.
We lost him. But the comment he made earlier has been posted into the chat box, and it reads that the way to internationalization is building capacity from local, national, regional, and finally the global stage. Let us internationalize amongst ourselves, least cost to build strong foundations for global internationalization, lest the problem of global not comparative advantage remains. That was his comment earlier. I think he's back. Professor Nico, okay, you can take over, sir. Yeah.
I'm back, please. As I was saying, Sas, that we have the African Free Continental Trade Agreement, where Africans are trading among themselves. And that is internationalization of trade. When we talk about internationalization of universities of knowledge in higher education, we can also relate amongst ourselves from position of strength and build a very strong African universities. And once we are strong, we can now discuss with the North, the global North, from very strong position. That is my take, that let's take it in piecemeal, build our local capacities. We have African Center of Excellence now in many countries, and we have other centers promoted by funders, including AFDB, African Development Bank. And with that, once we internationalize amongst ourselves, we can now hit the world stage globally. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Sadiku, for your comment. This moment, Dr. Joanna, do we have, would you want to take it over now to invite the speakers to give some remarks?
Yeah, if the speakers would like to make any comments about this or any other point before we close, perhaps.
Yeah.
Ruth?
I think their final remarks will be
final remarks. Okay, so on the comments that came on academic xenophobia, I think the point I wanted to raise was, one of it was what Prof discussed when it comes to strengthening our intra-African universities. So Prof threw more light on that, so I wouldn't want to repeat that. Another thing I wanted to talk about is if we are able to strengthen our digital learning. So it could be through international webinars like we are having now, where you don't necessarily have to travel to the country, any other country, where you can have international webinars and conferences like what we are engaging in right now. We could also strengthen online collaborative education. So we could have, like I mentioned earlier, there could be joint or collaborative courses where students locally could engage with their peers outside in other universities, international, without necessarily having to travel there, which will kind of help us to overcome the limitation of visa acquisition and funding and all of that. But we could strengthen the digital space by participating in online or collaborative online programs, which would also go a long way in the internationalization that we are discussing about. So it doesn't necessarily have to be mobility moving from one place to another. So to reduce the dependency on the foreign institutions and also the issue of visa acquisition, those limitations, we could leverage more on digital learning, the digital space, to be able to still gain the knowledge that we want, whilst we do not necessarily have to travel to other countries like we are discussing.
Thank you very much, Ruth. That's great. Fawzia, Is there anything you would like to say at this point? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to mention that there are some key players that also need to come in matters of internationalization. Like we have Association of Vice Chancellors of Nigerian Universities. It is a body of Vice Chancellor of Nigerian Universities, and they promote internationalization among members. So we need to work more on this, improve on it. If before now the percentage of students that come from outside, let's say was 20%, how do we increase it to 30? How do we increase it to 40? Or just like my sister Ruth just mentioned, using the digital space without necessarily moving in and out. You can see as the large number of students staying wherever they are, and they are still our students. And we can still exchange whatever knowledge, culture that we needed to exchange. Then Nigeria International Education Partners, NIEP, is actually a non-profit organization that promotes international education and partnership between Nigerian universities and international institutions. So if you have more of this, we can work collaboratively in seeing how to further increase the internationalization that we wish to achieve, while passing across our local culture, and especially all the positive aspects of African culture, then we exchange it to them, and we pick everything positive also from them. Then the last one has to do with the projects, using our own people for international projects, rather than bringing in experts from outside. The experts can come in briefly, train our own people, create employment, and leave. So these are ways of exchanging knowledge, exchanging skills. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. That's great. Felix.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. I think the point I just want to make is that I do agree very, very strongly with my colleagues, and particularly with the last speaker. He mentioned very, very interesting points, which I think deserve our attention. But the one thing I just wanted to say is that the European countries have become so prominent, particularly after the 27 countries came together as a European higher education space. Some of us, growing up in Zimbabwe, we did not know some of these countries that we now know, and to which a lot of our students are now going, which we would never have actually, come to think about. So the point I just want to finish with is that I think Africa will actually be a better and stronger international higher education space if it sought some kind of unity. I think the creation of an African higher education space is probably something that will bring greater value to all of us on the African continent. And the last speaker mentioned something about the harmonization of programs, which is extremely important, and that was one of the big projects of the European Union in terms of harmonization of programs. And that was to allow cross-border accreditation, that was to allow the comparison of standards, and so that people don't say, no, we don't quite think that the quality in this part of Africa is good enough. And so I think, that's the kind of thing that we are talking about. And I think if we started there, some people might actually argue this is probably our final objective. I would argue that it should be our first objective, the unification of Africa in terms of creating an African higher education space. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Felix. That's great. Thank you. Krishna, is there any Any final comments you would like to add?
This is great. Thank you, everyone. Certainly, we enjoyed hearing from each other's. And Joanna, thank you for putting together all organizations and individuals across the planet. This is very meaningful, and I look forward to seeing you all in our next session next month.
Thank you very much, Krishna, and thanks everybody for joining, for participating, for all your comments and questions. I guess what we can now move on to the next session, where we will explore issues of policy in more depth and perhaps think about proposing policy briefs or recommendations. So we will definitely be taking this conversation forward. The main thing I personally take from this is that we have discussed so many issues. There are lots of layers around internationalization. I mean, could all these be a step towards reconceptualizing internationalization within all the changes and perhaps transforming how we think about it and where we want to get to harmoniously, as mentioned before. So Dr. Dalko, I'll hand over to you. Thank you very much for the AAU for hosting and for this webinar. It's been great collaborating with everyone here.
And in the same vein of appreciation, I want to thank you also for driving this initiative. A big thank you to Professor Olusholo Yelwele, who has been very supportive. He began with us with a speech. Also to the Mauritius Higher Education Ministry, who are also with us, to stakeholders of the AAU. Mr. Nwad Lamini also played a very instrumental role in this program. Mr. Ransford Bequin, Professor Fedekatwama, all of you have been very instrumental. To our speakers too, as you mentioned earlier. Appreciate your participation and signing up to be speakers, and to all prospective speakers who are here and would want to be part of the subsequent episodes. Would want us all to put our camera on so we can have a big photograph for our publication that we had just for one. So kindly put your photograph on and we can have a big one. Great. And you want to wear a big smile as well. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. Appreciate your time, and kindly check your emails. We'll be sending you messages reminding you for the next episode, and do all to also keep us within your schedules. I appreciate you all. Dr. Yusuf, appreciate you. Have a nice day and bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.